Did you grow up in the U.S., R.L.?
I was born in the U.S. I actually grew up in Bahia in Brazil, and but I would spend the summers here. So I was kind of back and forth between my mom and my dad. Yeah, there is where I began my journey with martial arts. At age 6, I started training in Chinese martial arts, and so mostly like Wing Chun based martial arts. But I always sort of looked at every style because I felt like every system sort of had something to offer. So yeah, I was definitely influenced a lot by Hong Kong cinema, and growing up watching films from Hong Kong, Korea, and all these different countries. And so that's kind of like where my love for film came from. Like just a lot of those old classic action films from back in the day, like Jet Li, Jackie Chan, Donnie Yen, people like that. So yeah, I guess my career in film sort of grew out of that. Like grew out of the martial arts.
Where did your love for martial arts start? Like, what was the reason you got into it?
My dad was a martial artist, and so it was something that the minute you could walk, like it was imperative you start training, that sort of thing. So yeah, before I knew I even loved it, it was something that was sort of given to me as a gift, which I really appreciate because it definitely shaped, I guess, my whole life when it comes down to it. Martial arts led to film, and it also gave me like a very zen-like way the way that I am on set. I'm very zen and very calm. Most of filmmaking is like troubleshooting, and you have to stay calm, and it's important that no one sees you freak out or anything like that. So I'm very steady on set, and that discipline, that focus, it all like came from martial arts. So. Yeah.
So you would live in Brazil part-time and then come back to LA, was it?
No. I lived in the South. For a while, I lived in South Carolina, and then many years later moved to Atlanta, Georgia, and then came here. So yeah, sort of started in the South, so it was a interesting culture shock to sort of grow up. Not combative, but I was very. I had a very militarized mentality, I guess, and to sort of go from that to being like a black sheep, in the South, and because I was always a kid who wanted to, when everybody wanted to run out and party, like I was like, nah, I'm gonna work on the script, or I'm gonna write, or I'm gonna train, or I'm gonna, so no one understood what I was doing. Like nobody understood, like, this thing I was doing, like with film, and I was already proclaiming, like from a young age, like yo, I want to be a filmmaker, and yeah, nobody got it. Nobody at the time, nobody understood it.
You say militarized. Your father was in the military?
Yes, yeah. That's where the martial arts training came from, and that's sort of, yeah. So he instilled in me like a very, I had a very rigid, very structured upbringing, and so I walked around in combat boots and all black all the time, and and yeah, I just had a very unique way of looking at the world, but that discipline like really helped me a lot. Like it really helped me to focus, and like I've never drank, I've never had a drink, I've never smoked, and these were decisions that came about when I was like super young, so, and I never deviated from them. So Yeah, I think all that discipline, it certainly made a difference, you know.
So you were one kid in Brazil, and then you fly to the South, and everything changes for
Yeah.
however long you're there. How are you dealing with
Um,
that on a daily basis?
it was tough, honestly. Like I was very introverted, and I felt super isolated in a lot of ways because I just felt like nobody really understood the way that I thought. Nobody really understood, until eventually I had like a high school sweetheart or whatever. She brought me out of my shell, but up to that point, I was always thinking. So people thought I was angry all the time, but I wasn't. I was just very like intensely focused on like what I wanted to do, which was like be a filmmaker. You know.
Did you get picked on?
No.
Because they saw your martial arts training? Or?
Yeah.
They knew better.
I had an incident that happened, and then very quickly it gets around. You know what I mean? But what was interesting about that too is I've always been a teacher. Like I've always had students. You know, even as a young kid, like I always found myself in positions where I was like leading young men or like teaching young men or being somebody who guided a lot of people. Like I would always impart information a lot of times through martial arts. I always found myself teaching. Like I've always had the heart of like a teacher. I always wanted to share information. Yeah, I think that was something too that was like really, really close to my heart. Like just being able to share information with people. Even to this day, I always have a lot of people that I mentor and that I like to share information with because I feel like that's what it's for. I feel like information is to be shared, and if there's a way that you can help someone or give someone more knowledge about something than they had the day before, I think that's a great gift to give to people. So I really love teaching, like in whatever capacity. I'm thinking about starting to teach some seminars this year. Like I think I'm going to start doing that.
On film and writing?
Yeah. Nice. Probably like action on screen, how to capture and choreograph action sequences, how to produce projects from start to finish, more practical ways to do it. Yeah, I think that's something I'm going to do starting this year.
When did you move to Los Angeles?
2009, I think it was.
Oh, during the recession?
Maybe 2009. Yeah.
Oh, I bet that was fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I was fortunate though. I had some really good friends here. Andre McCoy, who's also a stuntman and a martial artist and an actor. Yeah, we were friends, and yeah, he was like, "Hey man, just come on out. Like, you can stay here. Just come on out." And because I told him, like, at the time I'd been living in Atlanta for quite a few years, and I produced like 2 feature films out there, and at the time I was the only one sort of doing action. There were a lot of people doing relationship dramas, like Tyler Perry type films and stuff like that. So I got like a lot of recognition really fast because I was just doing something different. And so, yeah, I did a few films out there and a couple other projects out there, directed a few projects. And I felt like I had done all that I could there. Like I felt like I had sort of reached the ceiling out there as far as I could go. So I knew it was time to come here, you know what I mean? So.
What was that moment where you felt that? Like, was it just where you were feeling stagnant?
Well, it was after the release of my second film. It was called Champion Road Arena, And at the time, I'd had two movies that were released worldwide through distribution. Um, they had done really well for me, and I just felt like I needed to be where things were really happening. Like I needed to. There were a lot of calls that I had gotten, a lot of interest I had gotten, but they were like, "Well, can you meet tomorrow?" I was like, "Well, no, I'm kind of in Atlanta," that type of thing. So it was the need to sort of be able to make things sort of happen in the moment, because when they happen, they would happen quickly. And I wasn't. I'll be like, "Well, give me a few days," and that type of thing. So I was like, "Yeah, I really feel like I've done all that I can do here." Um, and I just really need to be where everything is going on, everything's happening. Um, yeah, so it was inevitable. The move to LA was inevitable. Like it was always in the cards as well. So yeah, I think I just felt like it was time. You know.
So you're moving out here. It's 2009. Nobody kind of knows what's going on. They don't know how bad everything's going to get. How was that sort of uncertainty? I mean,
Yeah.
I think everybody was feeling it, no matter
Yeah.
how supposedly stable their situation was.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a plan though. I mean, because um, I'm very much like that. I like to plan. I like to sort of have a direction that I'm going in, and certain steps that I want to take to sort of get where I want to be. And I guess it comes from when I started out. Like I started at 15. I started writing, directing, shooting, choreographing, and editing. And I started really early, shooting on Betamax. And so the way I figured out how to create an editing system for my films was I would take two Betamax machines, put them together. Um, I'd pop the raw foot, like I'd shoot on Betamax, and I'd pop that raw footage in the top player. On the bottom player, I'd put an empty tape in there, and so and run it all through the television. And so I would use the pause and play button to actually cut on my short onto the empty tape. So I learned to get really precise, because if you make a mistake, you have to start all over again and recut the whole thing. So I used like two Betamax machines to edit, and then I ran a boombox into the Betamax machines into the television, and I had like all my cassette tapes kind of queued up with music, and I would have to, at the exact moment, I would have to pop the tape in and play it and record the music onto my short films. So I just kind of cooked up this elaborate way to make these short films, these little 5-minute and 10-minute little shorts. And I was sort of out of necessity. I was sort of used to doing everything myself. I would have to write the short. I would use my friends, and we would shoot on the weekends. And then throughout the week, I would edit and put the music on. And by the next weekend, I would have like a short film. Everybody sit around and watch it. And so yeah, I always sort of had that mentality of sort of having my hands in every part of the process. I'm still very much like that today. Like anytime I produce a project, or my company produces a film or anything like that, I'm like super hands-on. I do like a lot of freelance work, and those are the times when I'm just directing or something like that, and things move considerably slower, on those bigger projects. Like, I'm used to moving quickly and being like super efficient. But yeah, I think that's really why I'm able to get done as much as I do now, is because I started that way. I started with having to do so much myself, just out of necessity, and then yeah, It's interesting too, because like the first camera I ever bought, like so at 15 I put this camera on layaway. It was Japanese, this Betamax camera. It wasn't in English, so nobody wanted it. You know what I mean? And so that was the only reason I could afford it, is because it was so cheap, because nobody would buy this thing. And so I bought it. I took it home, and then I made myself like a table of contents. Like I would push a button and see what it does, and then whatever it did, I would just write that down. Like, oh, okay, that must be rewind, and this must be play, and this must be, and sort of like made myself a table of contents to use the camera until I learned all the symbols and learned what they did, and yeah, that's how I started making my first shorts, was with this Japanese camera that nobody wanted.
What store was this where you put it on layaway?
Oh, it was a pawn shop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was like an old school pawn shop.
But there were some interesting stories behind that camera.
Yeah, it took like 11 months to get that camera. I mean, every little bit of money I got, I would just put on this camera, and But one thing I appreciate about my parents is they never told me I couldn't do it. Like I would be like, hey, I'm gonna make, and they'd be like, yep, we'll be right there watching. Like they never discouraged me. They never said like, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? Like, nobody ever said I couldn't. So I never thought there was something I couldn't do.
You've produced over 40 short films?
Yeah. And that's starting from age 15 until sometime like late in my 20s. Yeah, most of them. I kind of had a plan. Like I said before, I started out with like little 5-minute shorts, and then sort of built to like a 10-minute short, and then to a 20-minute, and then 40 minutes, and then eventually my first feature film. Yeah, a lot of those were mostly for myself. Like some I'd released, but most of them I just wanted to focus on particular aspects of filmmaking. So, for instance, with one I might just focus on composition. Like another might be just lighting. Another might be sound. Another might be movement, or being able to frame action a particular way. Yeah, and so like yeah, I always sort of approached every aspect of filmmaking from separately. Like I'm gonna give you guys a tip. I'm gonna give you a really important piece of information, like one of my mentors gave me, and it was a way to sort of, like in the beginning when you're trying to train your eye as far as cinematography. This was a tip I got that sort of took my cinematography from here to here like overnight. So what you do is you get a binder, like a 5-ring binder or something like that. You go online, you search Google, you look for movies that are like $100 million or more, like in terms of budget, right? You find close-ups, you find 2 shots, you find masters, you find all these different frames, like still frames from all these films. The reason you choose $100 million films is because they can afford like the top cinematographers in the world, right? So you section off your binder. Let's say you want close-ups. So in this section, you put maybe 5 examples of close-ups. Another section, you put another 5 examples of 2-shot or whatever, over the shoulder, whatever. And you fill it up with those different frames and different sections. And so from there, let's say you're a cinematographer, you're kind of new at it, you're just starting out, and you may not really know how to frame subjects that great just yet. So what you do is every time you shoot, you set up your tripod, you set up your camera, you adjust your frame the way you think it should be, the way you think it should look. Let's say you have 2 people having a conversation, whatever the case is, and you want to do an over-the-shoulder shot. You adjust that frame to where you think it should look, right? Then you take out your binder and you go to over-the-shoulder shots, and then you hold that binder up next to your frame, and then you begin to adjust your frame based on the composition you see in those frames. And so as you do that, it's going to slowly begin to train your eye to have a more cinematic composition. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's just a little tip right there. You know what I'm saying?
Why invest so much time in all those shorts? Did you realize that you were going to work your way up to a feature eventually?
Oh yeah, that was feature films was always the goal from the beginning. But I've always had a very realistic approach to the industry. Like I didn't expect to be able to make Transformers like my first week out. You know what I mean? So I always felt like it was the craft was really important to really study it, to understand it, to be a student of film, to take my time and sort of get as technically skilled as I could through studying, through courses, through whatever it is. Not be so much in a rush to sort of just throw things out there, but you know, really have a solid foundation and really have a great understanding of all the different aspects of filmmaking. So yeah, most of those was really just to sort of go through the process, because you learn so much going through the process. Like it's one thing to have all these ideas, but until you really go through it and come out the other side, like you really don't understand it fully. You don't really know what it takes to go from script to screen, and all those little things in between. And so I wanted to start from a place where I would be comfortable, to start small, not be in a rush to jump out there and make a feature, but really just focus on like the art and the techniques of filmmaking, and sort of, as you know, as I'm comfortable to sort of branch out and make things bigger, you know. So yeah, it was always in the cards to make features, but I wanted to be comfortable before I jumped in, you know. And then ultimately, like my first feature, I produced it myself. I didn't ask for any funding at all, because I felt like before I could expect someone to invest in me, I needed to show that I invested in myself. And I wanted to show the value of my work, you know, because you know, that's a big thing, asking someone, especially if it's someone you don't know, asking them to take their hard-earned money and sort of invest in you. And the question, just looking at it from a realistic standpoint, the question would be like, well, why? Why invest in you? Like, can you even make this film? Like, this thing you're asking me to give you money for, can you even do it? Like, you know, you have to be able to show that you're capable of producing this thing that you're asking people to pay you to make. And so I wanted to have a track record of work, and I want a body of work that they could see. Basically, I want to take all the no's away. Like any reason they would have to say no, I wanted to take that away from them. And so a lot of that has to do with having a track record, having a body of work, even if it's even if you haven't had anything distributed yet, or you know, you haven't had any big successes there yet, to at least have a body of work that can show consistent growth, and like show the value of what you have to offer. You know, I thought was important. So
when you think back to being in Brazil and then being in South Carolina or somewhere in the South,
yeah.
How were you choosing which films you watched when you were younger? Like who was influencing you? Was your dad? Was your mom?
it came from martial arts, and then it came from my love of storytelling. You know, a lot of people think I only make action films, but I make like every range of film. I just happen to love action movies because it's something I grew up watching. But yeah, I think the martial arts was the biggest influence, but then also films that had nothing to do with action. I just liked really smart films, films that thinking man films. Films that would make you think, maybe be a little unpredictable. Maybe the approach to telling a story is unique, or sometimes it's just how you present the idea. Sometimes it's the way that you go about telling a story visually. There's all these different ways of, even if you don't have a lot of money, you can still make something unique. You can still do something interesting and different, and I think a lot of times people get too caught up on the budget, and they start to limit themselves, like based on the budget. Well, I don't have enough money to do this, but maybe there's another way you can approach that problem, or maybe there's another way you can approach telling the story that could be unique, that maybe doesn't cost a lot. Maybe it's in the way you shoot it. Maybe it's in the way you light it. Maybe it's in the way you edit it. Maybe it's in the sound design or something like that. So anytime I create something, I never put a constraint on it based on the dollar amount. I try to not think about that. I try to think about it in terms of how can I approach this in an artistic way, or a visually striking way, or something like that.
Is it a myth that you can't make money from short films?
Well, yeah, I think now, because I think things have changed so much. I think maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it would have been tougher. But I think that because there are so many platforms now that look for digital content, I think because you have sort of direct to consumer, you have that now as a resource. Like whereas before social media and places like YouTube, Vimeo on demand, all these different sites where you can showcase your work, and you can go directly to a consumer. I think there's ways now where you can do it. Like I know a friend of mine made a short film, and I think the short was maybe 30 minutes, but he had like a 3-hour course on how he made that short film. And so not only was he selling the short, but he was selling how he made it. You know what I mean? So it was like a little mini film school. So there's so many ways now that you can, get your product to people, and if it's good and people see value in it, then they'll purchase it.
Have you had a short film of yours purchased?
It's interesting because I'm actually working on a pilot right now. I've done a lot of those sort of things, like pilot presentations. I just finished directing and shooting a pilot called COLA. Well, it's called City of Los Angeles, but COLA is like the abbreviation. And I work with some really great guys on that. And that's something they're sort of trying to start their own little streaming platform to make like original content and stuff like that. So I just finished that one, and then I'm also working on a pilot called I Declare War. Like it's like a female-led sort of graphic novel style, like action project, and we start shooting that in April. And yeah, I'm actually thinking about testing that market a little bit, like either through Vimeo on demand or maybe some other platform, or maybe like an aggregation site or something like that. Just getting it on a couple different platforms. But that's something I'm curious about. Actually exploring myself.
R.L., what's your process for developing an idea?
I think everyone is different. Sometimes you'll get just a log line. Sometimes you'll see an image. Sometimes you'll get the name of it, but not know specifically what the story is yet. Usually, what I try to do is like as I start, I have like this. What is it called? Speech notes, I think it is. There's an app called Speech Notes, and so I'll start to get information, little bits and pieces about a story. I'll start jotting them down in my phone, and usually once I kind of have a good idea of what that story is, I always start with the outline. Like anytime before I write a script, I always outline the entire script, scene 1, scene 2, scene 3, and then I'll have like a couple of lines of information to describe the scene. So this is how I like avoid writer's block. Like I always outline the entire script from front to back. So when I start writing, I just write from that those script notes. But yeah, I usually start there. I start with just an idea, outline it. I always decide early on what the lighting's going to be, how the camera's going to move, the color, everything. Like before I even go into pre-production, like I have a full idea of the style, the look of it, the pacing of it, the tone of it, and yeah. Once I do that, I start writing the script. I have a team that I work with, and I usually tell them pretty early on, like what the concept is and how I want to approach it, and yeah, I sort of go from there. Yeah.
Do you have a pretty deep intuition?
Yeah. I always have a really good idea of what's gonna work. I think like I'm constantly looking at the market and how it responds to certain things, and you get a good idea of like, okay, this might not be a great time to make a Western, versus hey, like a superhero thriller might be really good right now, that sort of thing. So yeah, I always sort of watch what the market's doing, and it's usually pretty in line with my taste as just a film goer, like the kind of stuff I like to watch. And then you have to sort of project a few years out, because it might take a few years to get that project done. So you almost want to, whatever that story idea, whatever your approach you take, you almost want it to be a few years ahead of where you are, so that by the time it's ready, it doesn't feel stale, it doesn't feel old or outdated. So yeah, that's usually the approach I take.
Has your intuition ever led you to something that actually existed already, like a real life story, like you were so tapped in and then you realized, oh wow, that really happened? And it kind of surprising, or?
Not as of yet, like, because I like to be informed about things. Like I'm very much every day I'm always like seeking out new information or staying up on new tech as far as filmmaking, new gear, and then just like what's going on in the world. But I do like to sort of sometimes I like to pull things from what's going on in the world and sort of twist them a little bit, so that it is there, like there is an underlying thing that might be there, concerning something going on in the world. But I try not to be too on the nose with it, because I do want it to be entertaining. I try not to be overly political, because I know people get sensitive about that when you put like way too much politics in your film. People have like strong reactions to that sort of thing. So I just want to entertain people and maybe have them see things a little bit differently than they may have before. But I don't want to preach to them or that sort of thing.
Right. Is it hard to do that though? Because right now, like our culture is turning so much, whatever side, quote unquote side anybody's on. You
Yeah.
see it in the YouTube comments. We didn't used to see that before.
Yeah.
It wasn't brought up whatever quote side somebody was on.
Yeah, it's super political now. I mean, it's.
And so the thought that
Yeah,
you may have to, as a factor of how the world is changing and it's becoming an us against them, again, whoever side is them and whoever side is us.
Yeah.
That's how it seems like we're all viewing, not all of us, but a lot of people, we're kind of, it's seeping into the culture. And so as a factor of just writing about it.
Yeah, I think you can touch on some things without making a concrete sort of, this is the way it is, that sort of thing. I think you can touch on certain things and you can see a little bit of that influence there without without jumping on either side. You know what I mean? Just sort of just present a point of view, I think, and without hopefully offending anyone, which is very difficult. I mean, nowadays, but I usually try to deal with themes that are more universal, so it's less just sort of less localized and less focused on just one particular group or point of view. And because I think universal themes, like, we all can relate to. We can all connect with like a universal themes of love, wanting to protect people you care about, doing the right thing in a lot of cases, or some people doing things that are wrong but they feel they're justified or they feel they're right. So a lot of those sort of overarching themes, I try to play in that spectrum, yeah, because I want to make my films for like a global market. I don't want to create things that feel too localized or too like I'm excluding different groups of people. You know what I mean?
You think the martial arts affected that? Just the balance, staying more in the middle?
Yeah, I would say so. I think it's helped me in so many ways, man. I mean, even in the physical part of it is really small in comparison to the spiritual aspect of it, and the discipline, the self-discipline, the sort of the way that you sort of see everyone as being like we're closer, we're more like than we think we are. You know what I mean? And being a teacher for so many years, like having so many different people that you interact with and you become really close with, you start to realize that. And I think that's affected the way that I make films as well. Like, a lot of times we're just super misunderstood, like and sometimes we're not listening to other people. We're only trying to get our point across, and we're not seeing their point of view. Everyone's intentions aren't bad. You just may not understand their intentions, and I feel like you know, that plays really well with the. That's funny. But yeah, I think that plays really well in film, because it's very it's all about what you get from it, and it's all about sort of what you take from it, and different people will take different things from it. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's the really cool thing about being a storyteller is like you can tell a story and it's gonna affect people in different ways. You know. I'll never forget my first screening. It was the first film I made. It was called Champion Road, and it was back in 2006. I produced that film, and it came out in 2008. And I had a screening, like a local theater screening, and this guy came up to me afterwards. It was about this guy who his wife was dying, and she needed an operation, and they couldn't afford it. And so he wasn't even a fighter. He was just a guy, but he put himself in harm's way, to save her. And afterwards, this guy came up to me and he said, "Man, you know what? Like, he'd been having issues with his wife, like they'd been arguing, and I think through it he realized like how petty he was being, and how much he did care for her. And he was like, "Man, I'm leaving here and I'm gonna go get my wife back." And but he was like, "I just wanted you to know that," And I just thought like that was it. Like, no matter what else happens with this film, like that was so cool, so worth it. Yeah, that meant more to me than like everything else that happened with that movie.
What are the questions you're asking yourself every time you start to develop a story?
Usually, one of the first things I ask is, can it be done like right this moment? Depending on how it's being funded, or depending on how I have to approach it. I like what I've noticed in a lot of instances is when people go to make projects, they always focus on shooting it. Very few people focus on finishing it. You know what I mean? Through post and everything. So you always have to consider how you're going to finish it. And so, yeah, if I have an idea, it depends on how I'm going to do it. If I'm getting an investor, a private investor, or if I'm going to produce it myself, I start asking myself those questions. In the case of Lazarus, for instance, Lazarus is a feature film that I'm just finishing up post on right now. I partnered with Sean Riggs, who's an actor and also a producer, and we sort of went into it together as a vehicle for him. He had done a lot of great work up to that point, and but he wanted to do things more in the action genre, and so we sort of developed it, and the plan was to get outside investors, and which is what we did. So so knowing that, like I started to sort of devise a plan, because my goal was to sort of create more movies in the sci-fi superhero genre, to create my own universe of heroes, because I felt like there should be more inclusion of heroes, but I also feel like it's something that we can do ourselves. I don't feel like we have to leave everything to Marvel or DC. Like, I feel like there's room for other people to create heroes of their own. I'm very much a person who feels like you don't have to wait for someone else. I think you can do it yourself. I've always sort of had that attitude. So yeah, with Lazarus, we had an idea. I started writing, and we started reaching out to different financiers, and based on the work I'd already done, like the feature I'd just done before that, Call Me King, we'd done like a limited theatrical. It was on Netflix and did really well on Netflix, and a lot of other streaming platforms. And so we were sort of able to use the momentum of that film to fund Lazarus. And so, we sort of just went into that with the idea of that being the first of many new heroes that we'd create. And then my next feature coming up is called The Almighty Street Team. It's based on a comic book and a video game. And the guys that created that, it's 5 guys who sort of had their own individual hero, and then they sort of put them all together. They met at a comic book convention, and they put all of them together into one book. And when I saw it, I was super blown away by it. And so I knew those were going to be sort of the 2 flagship heroes, like in this new studio, Wonder Studios. And so, we sort of set out on this quest, man, to just bring new heroes to the screen. So I'm really excited for people to see Lazarus. We worked really hard on it, and it was an interesting experience because there was a lot of visual effects involved. It's probably it's the most visual effects heavy film I've done to date.
What did your first few screenplays teach you about screenwriting?
That's a really good question. I think some of my even like a lot of my early films, I was a huge lover of like horror action, sci-fi action. I always like sort of the more supernatural themes, or the more the stuff that was sort of extraordinary, because it was I felt like there were no rules. Like you could sort of in terms of story, you could say or do anything you wanted. So a lot of those early scripts were in that vein. It was like these huge epics. Like I learned very quickly that when you start out as a writer, like don't write yourself into a situation where it's something that can't be made. I think that's the biggest thing I learned is sometimes you need to sort of tone it down, bring it back down to the ground a little bit, because we can tend to sort of get really extreme and really crazy with our ideas. And sometimes if you're just a writer and you don't do any other part of the process, like you can sort of make things that are so big and so expensive that you almost limit your options in terms of being able to get it made. Like you can go too big, so I would say that's the thing I learned early on. Like I used to shop a lot of scripts around, and I had these lofty ideas, and when it came down to actually making my first feature, I was like, okay, that's not gonna happen. Like we cannot make Transformers with no budget, so we got to bring this back down to reality. And so I started to shift my approach a little bit. I started to look at the things I actually had access to versus sort of writing about these things that were just way too big to get made. And so I started looking at the resources I had, and then let that influence the story or the way that I would write the script. For instance, if I knew somebody with a bar, or if I knew somebody with a garage, or whatever the case is, I once it came to actually producing this stuff myself, I started using those resources and developing stories around those things that I knew I could do and knew I could get access to, so that I would set myself up to succeed, as far as producing these projects. And I was like, I started out writing these extreme, massive stories, and then I was like, okay, I'm gonna bring it all the way down to the ground, and then work my way back up to making bigger and bigger films, and sort of do it that way. But yeah, it really came down to like, okay, let's really get real about what we have, what we don't have, what we have access to, what we don't, what we can make, what we can't, and kind of go from there, yeah, so I think that was the most important lesson I learned, is to you sort of have the dream, and then you have the reality, and you have to operate based on realistically where you are and what you have, and just work your way up from there.
So you saw a movie like Tape works. It's
Yeah.
pretty much one location, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and just incredible dialogue and
Yeah.
interaction between the talent. But in terms of maybe some of the technique, what did your first few screenplays teach you about that?
What was interesting is because of my background of sort of doing it every part of the process myself, I had a slightly different view of it, because when I write, I'm already thinking about how the scene is going to be done, how it's going to be shot, what type of shots I'll be using, because I'm also the cinematographer. So yeah, it definitely I think gave me a different vantage point of it, because as I'm writing it, I know how it needs to be shot. I know how many shots I'm going to need. I'm already looking at I'm already sort of breaking it down as I'm writing it. And so I knew, like, as I'm writing, I know I'm able to do these things. Like, I know I'm able to produce these scenes, you know what I mean? So I'm able to sort of not limit myself, but I'm able to sort of be a little more informed about how I'm writing these scenes, like making sure that I'm not putting anything on the page that can't be done, you know what I mean? So yeah, I would say that from that standpoint, being the person that is going to shoot it, who's going to edit it, all that stuff informs the way that I would approach writing a scene. Yeah.
What's the most broke you've been in your life? And can you tell us a story about it?
Most broke in regards to filmmaking, or
Sure.
just yeah.
It's just a time in your life. We've been gathering stories about that.
Probably when I made my first movie, my first feature film. I actually produced my first movie for $500. Shot it in 3 weeks, between my house, my neighbor's house, and a friend's house that was like around the corner. So between like a 1 block radius, like and the way it happened is sort of like this is actually interesting. So I'd prepped to do my first movie. It was a whole totally different idea than what I ended up going with. I had done pre-production for maybe 2 months, and it was all going to take place in like this really big building. And the day before we were going to start shooting, the investor pulled out. It's like, oh, something came up. I can't, I can't do it. So we had prepped, myself, the cast, everybody. We'd done all this prep for 2 months. We had put like a deposit on the location that we were going to use, the building. We couldn't get the deposit back. So I think that happened on a Saturday. We were supposed to start shooting Sunday, right? So I get the news on Saturday. I call up the cast. Between Saturday and Sunday, I spoke to everybody. I said, look, this is what happened, and now we don't have a budget. We don't have everything we prepped for is pretty much we're at square one now. And I was like, I know you guys are ready to shoot. They had already people had taken off days and took off time to shoot a film. I said, look, we're gonna shoot a movie. Give me a day and I will get back to you. But come, and now we couldn't shoot Sunday, so it was gonna be Monday. I said, just give me a day. Come Monday, we're gonna start shooting. So the way I ended up shooting my first feature was I would write the scenes that we were gonna shoot that day in the morning. The cast would show up that day, get the scenes. We would go through the scenes, and basically we would shoot the scenes so that the same day they got the scenes, we shot them. There were action scenes in the film. I would have to choreograph the fights the day of and teach it to the actors the day we shot them. So we basically shot the film that way every single day. Like I would shoot that day and then do the work that night to prep coming into the morning. And we shot the whole movie that way. Most of the actors had no martial arts training. But I've actually developed, now this is also very interesting. I've developed a way of choreographing fight scenes over the years and making actors look like they know how to fight, and I use a sort of this chain link method where you take 3 or 4 techniques. We call it an exchange, right? So one exchange would be 3 or 4 techniques. You teach those 3 or 4 techniques to the actors. It's sort of a short burst of energy versus like just shooting a fight full on and people getting tired, and then that's how accidents happen, right? But you could get a short burst of energy out of them for 3 or 4 techniques, and in the edit, you use the last technique of that exchange. You would use that to cut into the first technique of the next exchange. And I actually learned that method from looking at, like when I was young, the barrel of monkeys, where they would have the hands that would connect and you pull them out of the barrel of monkeys. So that's how I learned to choreograph and then cut. The way I would cut is I would use the last part of that exchange as the first move. So even though you're shooting these tiny little bursts of action, when you cut them together, they seem seamless because you always use the material from the last punch. So I guess to simplify that, if I have an exchange and the last technique of that exchange is a straight punch, right? The next technique in the new exchange is that same straight punch, you know what I mean? So that you're able to carry that over. And I'm using the straight punch from the second exchange, not the last technique of that exchange. So that way, it just seems like a constant stream of energy, like this nonstop sort of action sequence, even though it was like these really tiny bursts. So that way you can keep everybody safe, and you can sort of control how things are done, and then you use composition based on like what's going to make that technique look the best. So you're able to hide their flaws and sort of show their strengths, hide their weaknesses, that sort of thing. But yeah, I think that whole 3 weeks of making my first feature with, I had no script, I had no, I had to write it as we shot, and they had no prep, we had no money, you know, that's probably like the brokest I've been. But that movie got like worldwide distribution, and sort of, yeah, that also showed me like how much power you really have, like as a content creator, like how you can sort of create something, and even if it's in a rough situation, it can still do great things, and it can still be received well, and yeah, that just opened up a world of possibilities after that.
And then how confident did that make you going forward before every other shoot? Because you basically had the bottom fall out.
Yeah.
And you still made it work somehow? I mean, you had people that they could have been very mad, they took all this time off, whatever. Yeah. Everybody was probably like heartbroken. You made it work somehow. How did that build your confidence? Yeah,
I mean, it was great because I never gave them the impression that things were just, you know what I mean? I was very calm. You know, this happened, but this is what we're gonna do. You know, like I never made it feel like it was a problem, like just this thing that we couldn't get past, or you know, I don't know. It was just the way I delivered it to them, I guess. And then I think also because they had seen a lot of the other work I'd done, like the shorts and stuff like that, I think they were pretty confident that we'd be okay. But I was very much, I was never like, look, oh my God, they did this, and I don't know what we're gonna, you know, I never did that. I was just like, hey, you know, we're gonna just change gears a little bit. You know, this is what happened. We're still making a film. Yeah, so I think just being calm and never sort of letting on how crazy things had gotten, I think that helped a lot. And to have it go so wrong and to be able to come out the other side with something that was like tangible, like, yeah, that changed everything for me. Like, you know, I just didn't feel like it was there. I didn't feel like there was anything I couldn't do at that point. I just felt like you just find a way. Like, you stay calm, you figure it out, you problem solve, and because if you strip away all the inessentials, right, when you get down to what a film really is, it's location, it's actors, you know, lighting, sound, you know, composition, storytelling, you know, and whether it's $100 million or $100, you can still tell a story if you have the tools, and you know, you can still tell a great story. It really isn't about the money at all. Money helps. Money can make things grander or bigger or whatever. But when it really comes down to telling like a human story, you really don't need a lot to do that, you know. And yeah, that's what it taught me.
It's an excellent story.
Thanks.
That's great. I'm sure it wasn't excellent at the time, but
yeah,
that's really scary.
Yeah, I really didn't panic. I just, because I was so used to it. I was so used to making these things like the way I was making them, you know, like as a kid, like I was so used to just, okay, I'm going to write it, I'm going to shoot it, I'm going to edit it, I'm going to, you know, we're going to use this room or that room. Like, so to me, it felt like just going back to like how I started, you know, and I was comfortable in that. And I think that's the reason why I didn't see a reason to panic. I just was like, okay, we can't do that, but we can do this, you know. Yeah.
We were talking about heroes a bit off camera, and you had talked about how your desire to create or show a certain type of hero was very important to you.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what that is, and what does the hero represent to you in storytelling?
So yeah, I my fascination with it, it was with the hero figure. It didn't start like with comic books and superheroes. It really started with action heroes and martial arts. And growing up as a young kid, studying Chinese martial arts, I was a huge fan of action cinema. And by the time I reached maybe 15 is when it really struck me. I realized that all my heroes were Asian, you know, and I was like, wow, like I'm doing the same martial arts, but none of them look like me, you know. And so, yeah, that's really when my journey started as far as filmmaking, because I made a vow that I would create platforms where I could showcase heroes that look like me but that fought like them, you know. And that was sort of where like my filmmaking journey started right then. I just felt like I wanted to see more heroes that reflected the way I looked up there on the screen. And it was never like exclusively that, you know, exclusively my image, but I just wanted to see I guess more of an even playing field, like more heroes that reflected myself and my friends. And so, yeah, that's sort of where it came from for me. The idea of a hero, like a person who would fight for what they believed in and fight for the right things and protect the people they love and protect the world, and someone who was like righteous and upstanding, and, you know, who had sort of all those qualities that I felt were like important, you know, things that were instilled in me as well. And yeah, so that's kind of, I guess, where that started. And even up until now, I felt like I wanted to contribute to that. I wanted to contribute to the idea of now that the superhero genre is so big, like it's sort of taken over everything. And there are a lot of discussions now, a lot of like people focusing on like more inclusiveness, I guess, across the board in all genres, and it's interesting now. I feel like the audiences are more vocal about it, and they're sort of ready to see more representation of female superheroes, superheroes of color, of every race, every creed. And yeah, I didn't want to be one of those people who just sort of complained about it. I wanted to do my part and sort of contribute to it. And that's sort of where Wonder Studios comes from. Wonder Studios is like a division of my company, Shadow Motion Pictures. And that division is going to be sort of solely for like films in the superhero genre and sci-fi genre. Yeah.
What about the character flaws in heroes today that are acceptable or maybe even embraced versus decades ago? Have we evolved in terms of allowing these superheroes to have more character flaws?
I think so. I think because we've been exposed to a lot more. I think when back in the 90s and, you know, 80s, 90s, that sort of thing, there was a very black and white sort of, this is what a hero is, this is what a villain is, you know, that sort of thing. And I think because we've been exposed to so much more material through streaming platforms, through television and movies, we're getting a lot more. I'm noticing things are a lot more raw, a lot more gritty, and we're sort of seeing characters that to me feel more human because they're gray. You know, they're shades of gray. And to me, it's a more realistic depiction of what a hero could be, because I feel like everyone has shades of gray. There's certain times when things may happen in our lives and we may get angry, but we're still a good person. But you know, we may react in a negative way or whatever the case is. And yeah, I feel like social media. I feel like just media in general has sort of impacted these stories, and we're seeing a lot more anti-heroes, and you know, we're seeing a lot more shades of gray, which is much more interesting than sort of the cardboard cutout sort of hero, because it's harder to relate to that idea, because nobody's black and white. Nobody is perfect, you know. And so I think that's why people relate to Batman more than Superman. I think that's why Batman is more, it's probably a little more popular than Superman, because Superman is more of an idea than a tangible sort of, it's hard to connect on a human level with Superman, you know, because he's, you know, he's like a god and he doesn't do anything wrong, you know what I mean? And so, whereas with Batman, like all of the reasons he became a hero was sort of born out of pain and loss, and he's angry and he's isolated, and you know, all these things like people I think relate to more. Yeah, I like Batman more too. So I think that's those are the reasons why, though. You know.
Do you think as a culture we're almost distrustful of quote unquote heroes or figures that are too perfect in this day and age?
Yeah, I think we immediately don't buy into it. Like, if, you know, because there's no one's perfect, you know. If we're talking about a human being, they can't be perfect. So it's the minute we're sort of presented with that idea, we're like, we're looking for things that are wrong. We're looking for, you know, like we're looking for the truth, I guess. Yeah. So that's how I feel about it. I just, there is no perfect person. And anyone who presents themselves that way is not to be trusted, for sure.
We're in an age now where let's dig up some dirt on this person. Not saying that that's the right thing to do, but it almost seems like that's where we've gone. It's become acceptable. Let's find an old photo. Let's find an old tweet. Let's try to get somebody on their dance floor and make them look bad in public. Yeah. Something. I mean, it's become part of what we see every day in the news and on Twitter and.
Yeah, absolutely. And
so it would seep into storytelling. Yeah,
and I think that's a dangerous approach. I think because I liken social media to like a Sims, like a live action Sims game where people have sort of these lives that they've created and they're sort of living through these avatars, and you know, I've always felt that like the bigger social media got, the more antisocial people became. Like, because you rarely see people in person outside of some type of event, especially like when it comes to the industry. Like, people rarely spend any time together anymore, like outside of a film event or a premiere or some type of something like that. But just to see each other, like, you're not gaining any other thing from it other than just, you know, having that relationship and spending time and being close and that sort of thing. And I think that's been lost quite a bit because of the way that social media sort of operates, like, you know, and that's why you have people who are very awkward socially, because they never see anyone. You know, it's easier to sort of be more outspoken and to have a certain personality when it's online, because there's no physical connection there. It's and I remember growing up, and the only time you see your friends, you'd have to go outside and hang out and be outside all day, and you saw people every day, and that's how you built those relationships. And yeah, now it's very rare that happens, and so I think, even because being a writer, I think like your life experiences help you. But if most of what you're experiencing is like through the web, it's like where does it come from now? Like where does how much of yourself are you really putting into your stories? Or I think you can lose a bit of that genuine sort of part of yourself that is so important in storytelling. Like, and it becomes more of data, like what you pull from the world and what you pull from the internet, and maybe not so much of anything you've experienced, but just information, what you think is going to work. But it's if it's not coming from a genuine place, then do people really connect with your art or no? You know what I mean? Like, I'm not sure. I know for me personally, I always try to put something of myself, like some personal part of me, in every film. I could probably look at every movie I've made and look at that storyline, and it's going to be some reflection of my life, some kind of way, something I went through. Yeah.
That's interesting, because even I think, is it William Gibson, cyberpunk writer, like Neuromancer and those different books about the cyber world, he says he's actually not a technophile. He's actually the opposite. And you would think that would not be the case, since that's what he's writing about. So that just those sort of the need for human connection in terms of developing a story. And it is lost, and maybe people gain it from creating burner accounts, and then they try to get reactions from people, and maybe that's how they can sort of see human emotion, is pushing buttons online, which definitely there's places for that. But that's a good point in terms of being able to go out and just connect with people. Now, even when you see them, there's a phone in their hand, and you're not really connecting.
Yeah. You see, like, you go to lunch with someone and their head's in the phone the whole time, or everybody at the table, everybody's head is in the phone, and then they'll eat, and then when they're done eating, their heads are back in the phone, and it's just like there's so much going on around you, but no one's paying attention to it. It's just interesting. Like that's the way people wake up. The minute they open their eyes, they start reaching for their phone. Before they can even see clearly, they've already reached for their phone, and they're trying to see what they missed, and
whether it's real or not.
Yeah, and then I'm afraid to see what the future's gonna look like. They'll probably just get chips implanted and be online 24 hours even when they sleep. I don't know,
How do you craft the hero's journey?
Wow, that's a super interesting question right there. I think it starts with how you define what a hero is. Even I think that people think a hero is just somebody that puts on a suit and a cape. You know what I mean? And it can be. There was a concept I started working on a few years ago where it was about a homeless man who was a vet and lived in the slums, and he had met this this girl. She was like a foster kid, and she'd gotten like kidnapped. They were gonna traffic her or something like that. And you had this homeless man who nobody just paid attention to, and she was the only person who befriended him. She would see him every day and talk to him and give him sandwiches, and she was the only friend he had, and he like went through all this stuff and fought and died at the end to get this little girl back, you know what I mean? And she was a kid no one cared about, and to me he's a hero, you know what I mean? Like it's so I think sometimes the focus or the perception of a hero is what we see in all these superhero films, but I feel like in really everyday situations, in any situation you can find a person you would consider heroic or a hero, and those stories need to be told as well. So I think that especially as filmmakers, like I don't want anyone to get discouraged, like as far as if they feel like they can't make a film like Superman or this big sort of superhero film, you can still make films about heroes, like in everyday walks of life. Like it doesn't have to be just the status quo example of what a hero is. It can be any scenario, any situation. Like a dog can be a hero, yeah, I think there's so many ways to approach that idea, and I always try to go with what we may not have seen before. Like I always try to find something. They always say like there's no original story, that sort of thing. But I think the approach can be original, or the way that you attack the material can be an original way, I don't know if that answered the question, but I just,
You'd said earlier about being very visual and how you were going to write out your, the different action sequences. So are you good at writing them, or are you better with sort of the conception of it, like in your head, and then just because you're kind of speaking your own language to yourself, because you're going to also be behind the camera, you know what to do? Or would you say if someone else got a hold of one of your scripts, they would know exactly how to do that action sequence?
They would not know.
In shorthand, okay.
Yeah, they wouldn't know. I early on, like when I used to write scripts early on, I would actually write out. I found this to be the wrong approach very quickly, but I would write out all of the action in the script, and the script would end up being 300 pages, and so what I started doing is I would just write, if there's an action scene, I would set it up and sort of write action sequence 1, and then separate all the information in like a separate, separate writing or separate information. So I would just put that annotation there, and then I would expand upon it like separately, so that the actors, when they're reading it, they're not understanding all that stuff. So I started to split the two apart, and I used to do it the hard way. Like I would write out every single technique, almost like I'm playing cards or something. I would write the name of the character side by side, and then if this person does this technique, this person does that. This person does this person does that, and I would write out every single technique. And after a while, I stopped doing that. And so now I just get together with my team, and we'll actually choreograph the action, and we use what's called blocking tapes. Like we would shoot the action in sort of a more primitive setting, And then on set, we just use those tapes that we shot. We've already worked out the composition. We've already worked out all the camera angles and all the choreography, and then we use that as a template or a guide. When we're on set, we sort of go by that. And I found that to be like the most effective way, and also just having time with the actors, sort of with the stuntmen, with the actors, being able to sort of prep them and get them as prepared as possible, and seeing what their strengths are. If you have actors who may not have any training, but they maybe have done a lot of sports, or they might be flexible or agile, or have good coordination, or you kind of see what works for them, and you sort of base it around what they're good at, like what their strengths are. But yeah, it's evolved over time, like the way I sort of approach action. And when I was really young, when I first started out, I didn't do any of that. I just I would choreograph the fight sequences the day of the shoot, and do it that way. Choreograph and just sort of shoot it in sections. Yeah, but now we have like a much better system in place. Get better results.
Have you ever done it where you sort of reverse engineer it? You watch the film and you, like, let's say the Raid 2 or something, and then you're documenting all the moves that they're making, or no, you've never kind of tried to reverse engineer another director's sort of notes?
I as far as action, no. But what I do love is like special features. I love special features more than the film, because I like to see how everything's done. So I will, like, if I see a really great shot or something like that, I will reverse engineer how that shot was done, or how but as far as action, not specifically, but yeah, I think anything technical as far as composition or lighting or any unique shot or anything like that, I like to see how those things are done, and then sort of be like, okay, how can I get that same result but just way cheaper than what they might have done it for. So yeah.
Yeah, special features is a gift to any movie lover.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Especially if they're older ones. I watched one with Brian De Palma on Carrie, and it was great just to see. It was just fantastic, and just to hear too that she wasn't the original choice, which I can't imagine anyone else but Sissy Spacek. But
yeah,
just to see all that, and it's just really like it's like a present, I think.
Yeah, I always feel like whoever that role is for, that's the person. In most cases, I mean, that's who it gets it. Like, it may not be who you think in the beginning, but when I think back to so many movies that had casted certain people, like Will Smith rejecting the role of Neo, and then Keanu Reeves getting it. I can't imagine anybody but Keanu in that role. Right.
Who are your top 5 action directors, and which works of theirs are your favorites?
I would have to say, and this probably explains a lot of the way that I approach film as well. Like Wilson Yip, who's a famous Hong Kong director, David Fincher for sure, Christopher Nolan, Zack Snyder, and probably Yen Wu Ping, like as far as action goes. Yeah, I think for Christopher Nolan, it's like his scale and how epic his films are. For David Fincher, I think the meticulousness and the attention to detail he puts into his projects. Zack Snyder for like his visual aesthetic. I still think like Watchmen is like one of the most technically beautiful films I've ever seen. Like as far as composition, lighting, you know, it's a gorgeous film. Yuen Wu-Ping is a legend, you know, as far as in the action world, as far as being one of the greatest choreographers to ever live. What was the other director I mentioned? Wilson Yip. Wilson is also he sort of changed the face of Hong Kong action films. Wilson Yip is the director who did the Yip Man films with Donnie Yen and Dragon Tiger Gate and what else has Wilson done? And SPL, which is one of my favorite films. The way that they sort of approached filmmaking in Hong Kong at that time, his style was so bold and different. Like it really just was uniquely its own thing, you know. Those directors I think have probably had the biggest influence on me. As far as the way I approach filmmaking, like my style and the meticulousness and, you know, that sort of thing. Like always trying to make every project look uniquely its own. Like nothing looks like, no one looks like the other. I'm sort of a big fan of that. Like having everything sort of have its own stamp and its own look and its own feel. I don't like to repeat things I've done. I don't like even if it comes to just the look of it. I don't like two projects to look the same, you know. I think those are definitely my top 5 right there. You know.
What about remakes? I realize that doesn't mean that they'll necessarily look the same, but does that bother you, or you actually enjoy some of the remakes?
Oh, wow. It depends, because it's a lot of times it's I tend to like the originals more. I think a lot of times stuff gets lost in the translation. Like there are certain things that made that film popular and that they're trying to draw from, but it's never really the same. In most cases, you lose a lot. More so, I think, with the storytelling than the production of it. Like sometimes you can have something that's produced even a little sharper, but the storytelling is where people seem to not focus on too much. It's more of just sort of the overall theme of it. But I feel like magic gets lost a lot with remakes. You know, I'm not opposed to them, but in most cases I don't think they're as good as the original. You know.
You think it's because we rely too much on the tools that are going to make it look so sort of highly produced, but then...
Yeah, I think it's a lot of times it's, truth be told, in a lot of cases it's a cash grab. Like it's sort of cashing in on the name of it, that thing, or, you know, because it was popular and not really focusing more on why it was popular. Like what about this mixture of things resonated with people? Not just the name of it, but what about it specifically resonated? And I think that's the question. And I think, you know, in a lot of cases, if you can't add anything more to that, then I think it should be left alone, you know.
Where do you struggle most with writing screenplays?
Interestingly enough, it's just writing. I think I've been writing for so long that I'm at the point now where I wish there was some really good software where I could just talk and it would just write it in script format for me, you know. The physical act of getting it out of your head, I think, is the hardest part now, because it's usually most creatives, especially if you storytellers, there's never a time when you don't have stories just constantly coming into your head, like ideas, and you know, and even if you flesh out the idea fully, when it's just a physical act of typing, you know, I think that's the thing. When I was really young, it was fun. You know, just young and you just typing and everything's great and you can just type for hours and hours every day, and you know, but because I do so many other things, I think that now I would just really love to just have that be automated, you know. um, I got I'm you know, I'm getting to the place now where I have a few younger writers that I'm working with where I can sort of outline the story. Not for everything, you know. There's certain films that I'm like, okay, this is my baby right here. But certain projects where I'll do an outline and then I'll send it to them, and then they can write the script based on my outline, and then send it back, and then I'll just like punch it up, you know. So that's been pretty cool lately. But yeah, I'm waiting on that magic thing where I don't have to type anymore, you know.
What about writing in long form? Is that appealing to you or no?
You know, it's cool because like when I started out, I started on the old school typewriter, like with the big keys that come out, and you know, you know, like that's how I started, and then moved to like the electric typewriter and then the computer. But but yeah, I just think I just want to talk. I just want to talk and have something just typed for me. If I could never physically type another script again, I'd be great. That'd just be awesome.
Is that because you don't like the screenplay format? You know, you'd rather do it almost in novel form and then.
I just think it's just the physical act of like the because it takes so much brain power to write. It's very like exhausting. Like it just takes your soul. You know what I mean? Like, so I think it's just that part of it. Like I love telling stories, and I still have a lot of things I want to say. But I think because of the fact that I still edit, I still shoot, I still direct, I still do sound design on certain projects. I still do, you know, like because I'm doing all that other stuff. You know, when I physically have to type a script, like I might get a couple pages and I'm done. Like, you know, I have to really be like, unless I'm, you know, you're so in it and you're trying to just get it out of your head, you know, that's different. But I try to set goals though, like because I'm older now, so it's harder to write as much as I did before. So I try to set goals like a certain amount of pages or that sort of thing. Like I try to do it that way, you know, just break it into sections. You know, right now I'm writing, finishing up the Almighty Street Team. I'm finishing that, adapting those comic books into the script, and I probably got 30 pages left. Like I'm almost there. But yeah, it's been a process of, and that's been difficult too. Like adapting something that already exists, like a comic book or doing an adaptation is very different than when you're sort of coming up with something completely original. It's sort of riding that line of how much do you keep, how much do you change, sort of bringing it from a comic book into live action. There's certain things that are going to operate differently. So that's been a unique challenge. This is the first time I've done that, adapted anything that it was pre-existing. So that's been like a unique challenge, like an interesting one, but very different. Because I want to stay true to the spirit and of the material, and then there's great moments in the material that you definitely want in there, and then certain places you have to sort of expand it to make it work. But I think I found a really good space with it.
Does it ever frustrate you that it takes so long to make the kind of movies you want to make?
Oh yeah, absolutely. By nature, I think the industry just moves very slowly, and so everything is a process, and there's so much you don't control. There's so much that's sort of out of your hands, and so yeah, it's sometimes it can be frustrating. The hurry up and wait mentality, or waiting for certain people to get certain things done, and then also like with yourself, there's only so much you can do in a day. You don't want to get so obsessed with things that you neglect your life, you neglect your family, and things like that. You want to have balance, which is really tough, because most of us in the industry are so driven. Like, we know things move like at a certain pace, and if we move at it, if we're slow and everything else is slow, then nothing's going to happen. So you tend to push harder to sort of compensate for how slow things actually move. So, but it's important. It took me a while to find that balance. Like I was a person who was 17 hours a day. Only sleep 3 hours a night. That sort of thing, and so driven. And after so many years of it, you realize like, it's not helping that much. Like, you're giving so much of yourself and your time, and you're neglecting your family, and you're like, as soon as I get this film done, I'll be able to say hi to you, that sort of thing. And then when that's done, now you're doing something else, and so you got to find a balance, and you have to have tremendous patience. Like, you can't be a person who is reactionary and who gets frazzled very easily. You really have to have a lot of focus, and you have to be super patient, and just try to look at the big picture, but also look at just day by day. Like, what can I do today to sort of move things forward, and just have like these smaller goals and these smaller levels that you can sort of reach, and these goals you can hit every day to sort of continue to push towards what you want, and eventually you'll get there. Like, some projects take years to finish, and I always say, like, it's what you do when no one's watching that really counts. Yeah.
What about the balance in terms of how people receive the project? There's that sort of artist cliche saying that the work is never really yours once it's finished.
Yeah.
I don't know if you subscribe to that, but
no, I mean, there are going to be people who connect with your work, and there are going to be people who may not, and that's fine. You know what I mean? And for me, as long as I feel like I've done, like, by the time that project goes out, as long as I feel like I did everything I could to make that project the best it could be, I'm good with it. I can live with it. You have to sort of move on. Nothing's ever perfect. There's always going to be those things like, man, if I just could have reshot this, or if I had more time, or if I had more money, or if, But I think as an artist, like that's just natural. Like we all do that. Like we all are perfectionists, and but yeah, you have to sort of be okay with just doing the best you can with that art, and then just letting it live, and you know, the people who are gonna respond to it, they will. But you know, I never really, I never kind of, I never focus on that. I never focus on what, how's it gonna go? Like it, you know, it's gonna sort of live and be what it is. And if within myself I know I did the best I could with it, I poured everything I had into it, and I wanted to make it as great as I could. I'm good with it. You know what I mean? And so far it's been cool. Like I've done pretty good. It's like gotten the energy's been good with you know the kind of films that I make. Yeah, I'm happy with where the fan base is right now. You know, with my material. You know, but everything I do uh, for the people watching. Like I really want to give them like um, the best experience they can with that piece of art, and entertain them as much as I can. And I always want to put more value into it than the sum of the resources I had at the time. You know, if I have $150,000 and I make a project, I want it to look like I spent $500,000 or $1,000,000. You know, that sort of thing. So I'm always sort of pushing as far as I can with the production value, with you know, sound, composition, lighting, actors, like everything. You know.
I've heard you say composition. I've heard you talk about composition many times. Do you just even go like to the grocery store and you're just like, okay, this aisle at Ralph's, I'm framing it here.
Absolutely.
I would do this over here.
Yep. Yeah, that was always a really big thing for me. I would notice the way things are framed and like what I deemed as cinematic, you know what I mean? And I always felt like that was one of the weapons, like a person who is an independent filmmaker or a content creator versus money. I always felt like that was one of those tools that could help make your project better, like the way it's lit, the way it sounds, and the way that you compose your shots. You know, like the term cinematic. Like how cinematic can you be, even if you have no money? How can we make this look like a movie? Like, how can we make this look big? How can we make this look bring as much spectacle to it as you can, even if you don't have very much, you know. And yeah, so yeah, I'm like huge on composition. Like I'll be, that's the first thing I notice when I'm watching something. You know, I'll be like, oh, look at the, you know, look at the composition and look at the way these actors are framed. Like, why are they framed this way? What are they trying to say? Like what, you know, like yeah, I just dissect movies a lot, and even when I don't want to.
But even in, it sounds like in real, in non-movie life, you're still dissecting.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I just I see cinema in everything. Like I see art in everything. I see cinema in everything. Like I can't turn it off. You know, it's such a big part of me, and yeah, it's one of those things like that. Just it's yeah, it just lives in you. Like you know, and yeah, I see so many shots right now. Just you know, just the way light hits a person's face, and the way the sunlight comes, creeps into a room. Like, you're always thinking of those things. You're always noticing those things.
Of all the films you've made, can you think back to some of the biggest mistakes with some of the action sequences?
I think the way I used to shoot action, because I sort of changed my approach later on. Like when I first started out, because I grew up on Hong Kong action cinema, I would approach shooting an action scene the way they do in Hong Kong. So they have a very particular style and a way that they like approach shooting action, and then so you kind of see that as like the Eastern way of doing it, right? And then I would look at Western films and how they would shoot action, and it was very different. They in the West, it's more, they shoot action more for coverage, and in the East, the shots are designed specifically for the technique that's being used at the time. And so later on, I was shooting the way they did in the East, and then I was like, well, there's a film I did, Call Me King, right? And I said, well, this is very much a Western film, and I just don't feel like the Eastern approach fits now, with this particular film. And so I ended up sort of marrying the two, like the way that Eastern films are shot and the way Western films are shot. So I used Eastern choreography or Hong Kong style choreography, but I shot it in a Western way. So that was where I sort of married the two ideologies, and found that it was like really effective. I was like, oh, this is really dope. Like this is better. You know what I mean? So yeah, I stopped shooting the Eastern way, and I started just keeping the choreography or the influences of the East in terms of choreography, but shooting it in a more Western way, and it just felt more modern that way. So yeah, I think that was the biggest lesson. I think over the years, like having shot and choreographed probably upwards to 300 fight scenes at this point. I found that was the most effective way to kind of give it a fresh approach. Like the choreography was fresh, but the Eastern way of shooting it was just a little over the top, I guess, like a little too much, So yeah, shooting action more like a Western cinematographer, but using the Eastern fight techniques. I found like a really nice fusion, and then I've sort of been doing that ever since.
And speaking of Call Me King, got a distribution deal and was on Netflix.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how that happened?
So yeah, we it actually started out as a web series before it got funded. It was a web series called Tui Puen, which was like patois, like Haitian language for kill point. And so I did like 9 episodes of it. Found like a great audience for it, and yeah, it just garnered a lot of energy. I was like on a lot of blogs and different things like that. And I kind of set it up the way it was like an HBO type of show. Like I set it up like every Tuesday at 1, and I had a new episode come out, and all these blogs would do like reviews on each episode. It was really cool. It was actually the first web series I'd ever made, and so there were some advantages, some things I liked about it, but there were some disadvantages because it was short, and I felt like there was more story I wanted to tell, but the format was so short I couldn't really say as much as I wanted, and so myself and my partner at the time on that project, Eamon Joseph, we decided to do a feature film version of it, and so yeah, we did a feature film and ended up getting a limited theatrical release through AMC theaters, and it went to Netflix and PlayStation, Xbox, Sky, like all these different platforms, and we there was a scene that something really cool happened with it too. There was a scene in the beginning of the film that went viral. Like somebody took a video of the scene and posted it online, and it was this girl asking this guy like to tell the truth in their relationship, like, yo, like, stop lying to me, just tell the truth. And then it was this monologue where he just tore to pieces and told the truth, right? And somehow it just found its way online, and it garnered like 70 million views. Like on this one scene, it was hotly like debated, and people were like, yeah, you tell her, and the women were furious, and it just became like this thing. And what was cool is like everybody kept going, well, what is this from? What, you know, and everybody go, oh, this is Call Me King on Netflix. This was Call Me King on Netflix. Like this is Call Me, you know, and so that's how it ended up pushing like Call Me King to over like 100 million streams like on Netflix, is because like this scene that went viral and people kept asking what it was. So yeah, that was really cool. That was like that film was really cool. It was about these Haitian gun runners, and they could speak like 5 languages, and yeah, it was really cool. It was really well received, you know.
Which platform has had the biggest impact on your career?
I would say Netflix for sure, definitely. The audience you can reach, like, and I know it's weird to say because I've had theatrical releases as well, but because it's such a huge global audience, I think, yeah, I think Netflix is amazing. The reach they have is pretty extraordinary what they've built, and so and nowadays I in certain instances I prefer like Netflix over a theatrical run, like depending on the cities and like probably the amount of marketing put behind it. But yeah, I think theaters and Netflix are very close right now. But yeah, I'd say Netflix for sure.
Are there certain cities that are surprisingly well received your films that most people would think, oh, I wouldn't expect that to be a big market?
I actually had a theatrical release in Korea with Call Me King. Actually, yeah, we were in theaters in Korea. We were in theaters in Africa, and in North America, and yeah, I had some Korean friends, who called me on the way to the theater, like, "Hey, we're going to see your movie," you know, and I thought that was really cool, man, because I'm a huge fan of Korean cinema. Um, I think they're amazing storytellers, and so yeah, I think the Korean market, South Korean market specifically, it's been interesting to see like the reaction it's had there. Um, so that was a unique place. South America very much so, and then North America, but also Korea. Like has been I think Korean has been the most interesting. Yeah.
When Call Me King was on Netflix, did you see a lot of people reaching out to you on social media, emails?
Yeah, absolutely. And what was interesting too is a lot of the actors in the film, they got a lot of energy from fans of the movie, like whether it be in person or online. Yeah, a lot of us got a lot of. I got quite a few jobs from it, um, but yeah, a lot of people sort of reaching out, and finding the film. It trended for a long time on Netflix. It was really cool, but I think a lot of that had to do with the viral scene from it. But yeah, I think there was a big sort of influx of people reaching out who saw the film, industry people as well. Um, yeah, I think up to that point that had been like my biggest film up to that point, as far as reach, and I think what it did, the reaction it got from the industry for sure. Yeah.
So were there other films that you did that where you expected it to go the way Call Me King did? Because so people say like you can't orchestrate anything viral, and there's so many times when you think something's going to be huge and it's not,
Yeah.
and then vice versa because of the relationship aspect of that one scene and people debating it, and then they go,
Yeah.
I need to see this. I want to know who the filmmaker is.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Call Me King was the last film I did before Lazarus, so Lazarus isn't out yet, but like the anticipation of it is really high. Like, you know, I've already gotten like a lot of jobs just on the trailer, a lot of meetings. Things are looking really good as far as like we have a lot of options as far as distribution, and so yeah, there's already sort of started to be like a groundswell. We haven't put out the trailer yet, but we will pretty soon. The movie's going to come out this summer, and yeah, I'm expecting some good results from it. Most definitely, yeah.
When people wrote to you about Call Me King, what were they writing to you about? Like, what were they? Did they have questions? Did they just want to praise you?
There were quite a few accolades, but also people were just happy to see it sort of exists in the action crime genre, like similar to like Goodfellas or The Godfather, sort of in that space. But it was the first time people had seen like this type of approach, like I was saying earlier, with them being Haitian, with them being gun runners, but they were very refined. They spoke different languages. They wore suits, and they spoke very eloquently. There was a really cool scene in the film where one of our lead characters, he's talking to his brother, but he's sort of telling him how bourbon is made. How it's clear when it starts, and then the reason it turns brown is because it's cured in wooden barrels, and so the wood is what gives the bourbon its color. Like it changes color from clear to this brown color because of the way it's made. And so he was using it as an analogy, and how like if you leave it too long, it'll lose integrity. And so he's sort of breaking down these ideals to him, but he's using bourbon as a way to do it. So people were like really they were like, wow, like that's different, like we haven't seen that yet. Like, and they're not drug dealers, they're gun runners. So I just wanted to sort of create something in the crime genre, but do it in a way that may represent like characters we haven't seen in this genre before, like and do it in a more unique approach than I guess we may have seen from a lot of films. That when you see people of color in those films in that genre, you expect it to be a lot more hood, I guess, or street, and not as refined. And so I wanted to sort of challenge that idea. And so I think some people found it to be like really interesting.
I'm wondering if you can tell us the story of how you're finishing up, or you've already finished with Call Me King, and then you start writing Lazarus, or how are you pitching this to investors?
Yeah, I guess I had the idea for Lazarus as I was finishing Call Me King, actually, and I had already started talking to actor Sean Riggs, and um, he's someone I've known for a long time, so I knew, you know, I knew we had planned on sort of producing something together, but I wasn't sure what it was up until around that time when Call Me King was sort of coming out, and it was actually a pretty easy process to get funded, just based on what we'd already done, and the definitely the success of Call Me King, it made it pretty easy. It's probably the easiest I've gotten a project funded because we still had a lot of energy from it, and actually the investor of Lazarus had seen Call Me King, so um, yeah, it happened pretty quickly actually. Like I had the story, the concept in mind, but I hadn't written it yet. Um, and once Call Me King was done, it sort of made its rounds. Um, I kind of quickly moved into Lazarus, and yeah, we were up and running pretty quickly actually. Um, yeah, and all that stuff was sort of coming together, like the idea of creating a universe. I knew the first hero in that universe I wanted to come from me, and then I wanted to start to bring in other concepts from other independent like comic book creators and stuff like that. Um, and so yeah, it came together pretty fast actually. Yeah,
You're writing the script.
yeah. How so yeah, I had the idea. I sort of took that same approach, did an outline, and just started writing. And um, it took me probably a few months actually um, to finish that script. But as I was finishing it, we were already getting funding and sort of um, getting ready. Yeah, it got funded kind of just off the idea of it, you know.
Mm.
The idea of it, and then the success of Call Me King was like, okay, you know.
Did you approach the investors, or did they approach you?
Yeah, we approached them. It was interesting because some of the discussions that came from Call Me King was like, hey, if you guys are doing something else, like whatever you're doing next, like we'd love to talk about it, or let me know what's going on after that. So um, yeah, as soon as we had sort of decided to move forward with Lazarus, like once I had the idea sort of fleshed out, like we went to certain people and we're like, hey, this is what we're doing next. You know what I mean? And so yeah, they got on board, pretty quickly.
What's the idea for the film? What were you pitching them that was just the idea? Like, how did you go in and present it?
I had a bit of like concept art, and I had this sort of I'd done sort of like a detailed synopsis of the film, so I was able to sort of break down the story and how everything sort of played out. Um, I had a ballpark of what it would take to make the film, um, and the fact that it was in the superhero genre, that was like super appealing to people, especially with how popular the genre had become by then. Um, so I think that was one of the biggest things that intrigued them, was like sort of my idea and my approach to it, but the fact that it was a superhero and a hero of color as well. And it sort of lived in that space of, I call it a superhero thriller because it does have like some horror undertone, you know, and so yeah, I think that those were the things that really sold the idea of it. Was the genre. If I was making maybe another gangster film or something, maybe it would have took a little more nudging, maybe not, I don't know, but the fact that it was in the superhero genre, like people got really excited about that.
And what's the film about?
Oh, I'm trying not to give too much away, but
Okay.
um, essentially it's a city. It's like it's called Paradise City. It's a city that's sort of like in the heart of like a Chicago or like a LA. And this whole city is sort of overrun by crime, and it's a bad place, you know. And there's a synthetic drug that you burn it, and you sort of the crystals produce this red smoke, and you inhale it, and it's like mind altering. And so you know, the whole infrastructure of the city is sort of based upon that and the people who operate it. And they use a lot of the people in the city as runners. You know, they recruit a lot of people to work for them. And so our main character, Ray Lazarus, like he was like a military vet. He was a sort of a bad person before he went to the military, and then he saw a lot of things and grew up and became a better person. So when he came back, he was a totally different human being, and got a lot of his friends to go legit and change their lives, and you know, just like a very productive citizen. And they tried to recruit him. He said no, and something very bad happens to him, and that sort of sends him on this journey to undo like a lot of what's going on in the city. But in that moment where he's where this bad thing happens to him, he's approached by an entity, and this entity sends him on this course, but it has its own agenda. You know what I mean? That's kind of all I could say, really. I probably said too much, but
Interesting.
but yeah, it's but he's like this super powered being that is trying to free like this city from the people that have sort of enslaved this city through this synthetic drug.
Are you able to talk about one of the biggest financial risks you've taken with one of your projects?
I think I know a lot of people talk about maxing out like credit cards and stuff like that. That's actually not a good idea. um, yeah, it's not a good idea. If you can help it. I mean, you want to invest in yourself, but you want to also be super careful about the kind of debt you put yourself in. And if that particular project at the time is worth that amount of debt, you know, maybe there's something else you can do in the meantime, something different. You know, if you have a family, especially, you know, and yeah, I have a wife. Her name's Isabel Scott.
Oh, okay.
She's has her own YouTube channel, Director's Wife, and she talks about like stuff in the industry and interviews people and stuff like that. So, but yeah, having a family, you got to be super careful, like about you know the approach you take to making films and like the kind of investments you know you make. So I would say, yeah, there was a project I produced on my own. Like it worked out, but Yeah, I kind of maxed out. Like I can't, I can't get credit cards anymore because, like, I maxed out these cards. Um, I'm still like paying that stuff off. Um, yeah, but yeah, I would just say that, like, if there's another way, maybe not do that. Maybe not max out the credit cards. Or someone else's credit card. Don't max that. Don't do that. You know.
How much martial arts training do your actors have to have?
Well, ultimately, they don't have to have any. Um, it helps, but if they don't have any, any other types of skills, physical skills, also help. Like if they have good coordination, if they're a dancer, if they're ballet, basketball, any type of anything physical helps. Um, but ultimately, it's just sort of finding like where their strengths are physically, and sort of hiding any of their weaknesses. Like if you have a person who's really coordinated with their hands, but they have like two left feet, you wouldn't give them any kicking to do or anything like that. You just sort of figure out, you know, what they can be good at, and sort of highlight that thing. Um, excuse me, but yeah, no, you don't necessarily need any training. But I would say to all actors, you should, if at some point in your career you're gonna be asked to like slap someone or throw a punch. So I think it's good to take classes to try and learn some, at least basic combat skills, because at some point you may have an opportunity and you may lose that opportunity if you're not equipped to handle it. So I think every actor should take some sort of classes and sort of get some sort of training, um, so that they're more comfortable being physical on screen. Um, yeah.
How do you teach them to fight?
Um, there's sort of different approaches you can take. Like some of it is like real, actual martial arts technique, practical technique. Some of it is more so for stage combat or choreography. Um, Before you can really teach choreography, you have to teach them the basics of movement. You know, um, and then there's another element of the acting that's sort of put on top of it. So you have the physicality, and then you have the acting that you have to do as well. Um, so yeah, usually the way I approach training an actor is I start with real martial arts techniques. Like I start with the basics, basic striking, basic blocking, basic kicking, stretching, um, sort of getting them used to very small movement, um, because on screen in a fight, you want to look explosive, you want to look confident, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing, you want to look like you've been doing it for a long time and you're confident in the way you move. So um, before you get to the choreography, it really starts with basic foundation of martial arts technique, and then you just sort of build from there.
What do you find to be the toughest part of making a film, and what makes it so tough?
Honestly, I think post production, um, even more so than being on set. I think post is the hardest, because that's where you really make the film. Like when you're on set, you're sort of, and you're filming, you're getting the ingredients to make a film, but you don't really make the film until you're in post. And there's so many steps to sort of completing a film and getting it ready. to go out. And I think the easiest part of post is the editing for me. I think when you get into like sound design and sort of mixing and mastering, getting the dialogue cleaned, and I think that's the most laborious part of it. For me, for sure, is sound design, because there's so many little things like that absolutely must be there. If somebody takes one step, if somebody puts down a fork, if every little thing that you sort of in a movie, like in life, you don't pay attention to, but in a film, if somebody sits a fork down and you don't hear anything, there's an alarm that goes off. And so yeah, I think those parts of post are the most difficult part of the process. Just really fine tuning and ultimately deciding what the film's going to be. A lot of times in the editing room, you can tell the story a completely different way. You usually what you had on paper um, and what you end up with is very different, or they're similar but different. And so you have to then sort of let that go, let the script go, and focus more on what you have in front of you. Like, how do I tell the best story with what I have in front of me? What I've shot, and yeah, I think post is where it all sort of, you really get down to business as far as what the film's going to be at the end of the day. So that's like the most difficult part for me.
So many people that come to LA, so many people they leave to LA, both on a daily basis for whatever reason. You came to LA in 2009, which was a very tough time for a lot of people, most people in this country, probably in the globe. What would you advise to people when they come here? Like, know someone, have a plan, don't have a plan, keep your mind open?
I would definitely say have a plan. I think if you're gonna come here, I think you should know someone. I think it's much easier to sort of navigate and get used to the city and how things work if you know a few people, or if you know one person who can help get you acclimated to it. You should definitely have a plan, and you should also sort of, as much as you can, talk to people and get a good understanding of how things work. Um, Usually, a lot of times, as artists, you come to LA and you have this idea of like, oh, it's gonna be this, and I'm gonna do that, and that may not be the case at all. It could be completely different than what you think. Um, so you want to talk to people who've been here a while, even if you're thinking about moving and you haven't yet. Start reaching out to people in the industry that are here. Like, hey, how is it out there? Like, how does this work? How does that work? What are some of the resources? If they're actors, like, what acting classes are you going to? Like, find out about central casting. Find out about like uh, Breakdown Express, LA Casting, like different uh, sites, and like find out like where you can sort of begin to get your hands in things, and get involved, and but be realistic about it. Be very um, take a very wide-eyed, realistic approach to how you can begin to sort of build yourself up out here. And yeah, I think that's the main advice I would say. Knowledge, information, real information. Um, you know, there's a. I used to say that I had goals and not dreams, because I felt like dreams was something. A dream is something you have when you're asleep, but it never manifest itself in physical reality, but a goal is tangible. A goal is real and it's obtainable. It's a realistic thing you can attain and continue to build on. So have like very realistic goals and small goals. Like don't start out sort of with your head in the clouds. Like really um, start at the bottom. Like really be like, okay, I know I want to get there, but I know there are things I can do. There are victories I can have that I can continue to build upon. Also, one of the most important things you can do is really study your craft, like hone your skills, so that when you do have those opportunities, you're ready for them. And also being able to show value in what you have to offer, like that's really important. So that it's not so much of like, oh, I want to be a star and I want to be rich, but like, what do you have to offer a producer? What do you have to offer a casting agent or a film? That sort of thing. Like, so really um, study and really focus on your ability to deliver. And, if you do that, you'll get more and more opportunities to showcase that, because people will see the value in your work, and they'll see the value in what you have to offer. So sometimes it really starts there, instead of sort of looking outward to agents and other people to sort of make you into this big thing. Like really start inward and with your own craft and what you invest in yourself and your ability to deliver. And um, yeah.
What about trusting people?
That's a tough one, honestly. That's a tough one. Because a lot of people will say a lot of things, and um, I try not to personally, like I personally try not to have a pessimistic approach to things, but I'm very I'm optimistic, but I'm cautious in the sense that until something happens, it doesn't exist. That's sort of how I look at it. Like there'll be times I'll get a job offer, and they'll be like, hey, we want to fly you to Canada and direct this film, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, okay, that sounds cool, but once I've done that, I sort of put it in another section of my brain. Um, and when you hear these things, it's cool, but you don't want to start like making all these plans and sort of having all these ideas based off of just a conversation. You want to wait and sort of be like, okay, I'm cautiously optimistic, but I'm gonna wait and see things play out, and uh, it's better to sort of approach things from that perspective. If you don't want to be constantly pulled in a million directions, and then things don't work out. Because the truth is, like, it's hard to get these projects made. Like, a lot of stuff falls through the cracks. A lot of stuff doesn't work out, and so you want to invest your time and your energy where you feel like it's going to pay off and it's going to be worth your while. So um, I would just say be cautiously optimistic, but um, don't believe anything until it's solidified. It's in front of you. It's happening. Um, uh, yeah, yeah. It's just like protect your heart, protect your mind, because you have too much disappointment, and you can start to become very pessimistic, and um, you start to feel jaded and cynical, and um, you begin to hate the thing that you love, and you don't want to allow anyone to take that from you. Take your love of um, this industry or what we do, like to take that from you. So you have to protect that. Yeah.
What about keeping yourself in line, not getting sidetracked for why you came out here?
Yeah, I think time is the thing that sort of determines who's really serious about this and who's not. Like, or who's the terms like built for it. Like, who's built for this, who's not built for it. I think over time, if you still have, you know, let's say you've been doing this 3, 4, 5 years, maybe some things have worked, some things have not. A lot of projects have come your way, and it may have been real, they may have not, or whatever the case is. And I think it's ultimately if you still have the same love for it, you know, like if it's in your bones and you can't shake it, um, then time will tell. Like time is really going to be the thing that shows you who you are, and when it comes to this industry, and if it really is for you, you know, or if it's just something that maybe you're in a new place, maybe you change or evolve and you feel differently about it. But I think as long as you love it, you should do it. Um, and if you get to the point where you hate it, then you shouldn't. You know, 15, 15 years old, and it has not changed. Like to this day, I knew then, um, and I still know now, and it's never changed. It's been constant. I love it just as much, if not more, today, because I see more possibility than I saw when I was a kid. You know what I mean? So, um, yeah, I would say I love it more now because even in things I've done, I still see so much more to do and so many more stories to tell, and um, but I just feel stronger now. Like I feel like I know more. I've been through more. I have more information, more knowledge, and you know, yeah.
What are your 5 tips for getting a movie made?
First off, be realistic. Don't ask for $2 million if you've never made a film. Chances are you're not going to get that funded. um, so yeah, I would say firstly be realistic about where you are, about what you're doing. Um, create a situation where an investor can't say no, meaning have a track record of work. I truly feel like if you've never made a project, you should not be asking for funding. I feel like you should do it yourself in the beginning. I think you need to produce some things yourself because you need to show a person why they should invest in you. I think it's hard to get people to just give you money. It's like saying to someone, um, "Hey, I want to do heart surgery on you." I've never done it before, but I swear to God, it's gonna be the most amazing surgery you've ever had. It's like it's hard to convince someone um, to take that kind of a risk when you haven't shown that you're capable of following through. And I see that a lot with a lot of young filmmakers. They're asking for money right out the gate, like, "Yo, $2 million, my first movie," and I'm just like, "Bro, you're not gonna get that. Like, no one's gonna give you that." Like, so I would say bring a lot more value than you're asking for. Meaning, um, if you have two filmmakers, if one has say never done a project before, but he has a script and a good story and an idea, and he's asking for $1 million. And then you have another director who has done 4 feature films and he's asking for $100,000. The chances or the likelihood of the guy who's only asking for very little versus what he's already shown and that he can accomplish, there's a larger chance you're going to get what you're asking for. And so, in the beginning, you want to set like a more modest, more realistic budget, like something that you feel an investor could part with, um, but give them incentives, give them a reason to believe that you can actually do this thing that you're saying you can do. And a lot of that comes from making the sacrifices early on and investing in yourself and making some things. Like, it doesn't even have to be features, it could be shorts, but just making things that you can show to someone and say, hey, like, I can do this. Like, this is what I have to offer. Um, and if it's technically not good enough, do it again. Do it again. Like, don't always be in such a rush to ask for funding until you feel like you're in a position where you really have something to offer that is worth a person parting with money, even if it's $5,000, $10,000, whatever you're asking for. Um, it may not seem like a lot, but it's a lot to them. It's a risk. It's an investment. So um, be realistic. Don't ask for the moon. Start off very small. Um, Produce a few things before you get to that point of asking, so that you have examples of your work, and also have a plan. Like, okay, you're gonna make this film. What are you gonna do with it when it's done? What are your plans? Like, how do you plan to distribute it? How do you plan to repay that investment? How you and there's so many um, avenues now with aggregation sites, with sites like iTunes. I think even YouTube does this thing now where you can put your film for sale on YouTube now, and have a certain amount. But have a plan, like have a not just to make the thing, but how are you gonna get this thing to the rest of the world? Have a solid plan. So I think those would be my tips. Yeah.
You've talked about being realistic, and I like that, especially here. I think that's something a lot of people don't always do. Has anyone ever said, you got to really hype this up more? Because I see you being very level about everything, and then you look at your work and it's amazing, and you're not here sort of bragging, and I see a lot of that in this town. Has anyone ever said, I need you to really hype yourself up, and you just kind of want to keep it more?
Yeah, I've heard that a lot, and the truth is, like, I win every time because I don't, like, if it's harder to pay back $1,000,000 than it is to pay back $350,000 or whatever the case is, and a lot of times, to be truthful, when it comes to distribution, um, a lot of times, depending on the deal, you're not getting these massive sums of money back. I mean, you have to have a certain situations where, like, if of course, if I cast Denzel Washington, okay, great, like, I'm gonna make this amount of money back. You know what I mean? But if you can't afford Denzel, you can afford someone who's well known, but maybe not as big as that, may not have as much market value or whatever the case is at the time. Like, a lot of distributors are not going to pay that over a certain amount, and so if you create things that are modest in budget, the chances of you making back your money plus a large profit is very good. It's very high. Um, so I think it's sort of like the Blumhouse mentality, right? Like, they make their films for a certain amount. They have more than enough money to start playing the $100 million game. Like, but when they look at sort of like, wow, we're winning, like we're making these films for between five and $10,000, and I mean million. I'm sorry, $5 and $10 million, and we put some money into marketing and we're making these massive sums. So why would we now want to start pulling out our hair and like playing this $100 million game where now we have to make $200 million back just to break even? And, you know, that's like a different game up there. So in some cases it's smarter to just like not overshoot all the time. It's not, and I'm not saying in every case, every project is different. But I think that if you can set yourself up to win from the beginning, you know what I mean? Then I think it's smart to do so. Like, if an investor gives me $1 million, I wouldn't make one film for $1 million. I would make 3 films for that $1 million. You know what I mean? So I just think that it really depends on the mentality of the person and how they perceive the industry. Like, this is how it really is, and this is how the outside world sort of sees it. And yeah, I've always been a realist. Like, I just think I just never found I'm not the person who, because I like to put the money on the screen. Like, I don't think that having there was something I heard a long time ago. I think it was from Spielberg, and he was talking about what's in the frame, you know, and about like, this is all that matters. Like, what's in the frame. It doesn't matter if like 2 inches outside of the frame there's tape running up the walls and you know, just all this weird stuff going on around it. What matters is what's in the frame, and like that's the approach I take to filmmaking. I don't like to waste money. I don't like to waste investors' money. So I don't like to have just a bunch of stuff that you don't need. 10 trucks like full of lobster, like, you know, and then in the frame, none of that value is there. Like, I like to keep the value in the frame, and not sort of be wasteful, and yeah, not spend it on a bunch of like honey wagons and being overly exuberant, like outside of it, that frame. Because at the end of the day, when audience sees it, this is all they have to go by. They don't know what happened on the set. They only know what they see. And so I don't like to throw money at things that aren't going to be beneficial to what's in the frame, you know. But some people enjoy that. They like the idea of extravagance on set, you know. That doesn't mean the movie's going to be any good, but so I just take like the opposite approach.
I think she said something earlier that really caught my attention. Was a lot of people take this time to boast, and you didn't do that. You were very humble in your approach, and she gave you a lot of thorough questions. So
Yeah.
you've had some interviews, but I think to me I'm taken aback by the interview. I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like, how does it feel? You know,
That's interesting, because I remember we had that conversation, and we there was something we were talking about, and I'm always like moving forward. Like, as an artist, I'm always sort of pushing forward. Like, I'm constantly pushing forward, and sometimes like I was talking to China, he was like, "Don't forget all the stuff you've already accomplished. Like, you had movies in Sam Goody back in the day, like, you know, like,
and blockbusters.
yeah, like, don't forget about that stuff, like, because I'm always so focused on like never stopping. Like, I had to sort of learn to appreciate the things that I had done, because you know how artists, like, we're never satisfied. We're always like, no, yeah, but the next one will be better. Like, but I just got so much more I want to do. And so I'm just an artist. I'm just an artist that just wants to tell stories. Like I don't and have people like appreciate the work, but I never found I never understood. I guess I kind of understand, but I never saw the point of like, yeah, uh, like I don't um throwing things around like that, like stuff you've done, and you know,
So you're
to me
you're a
that's
true
not
fan.
a yeah. I don't think a real artist does that. I think you allow people to do that for you, but you don't do it. Like you don't, you know, boast and brag because you, no matter how great you are, you didn't do it alone. It took a whole army of people to do it. So to me that would feel fake. Like if I'm like, yeah, my movie did this, and we did a nationwide release, and we made this, and it was over here. But I'm like, no, that was a collective. Like I couldn't have done that without those people. So I just don't. If anything, I'm just appreciative of like having those experiences of working with um, so many people and having like it's beautiful when it's like a family affair. Like you feel like it's a family, and you're like everybody's bringing their best to the table, and um, yeah, I just appreciate those moments, but I don't feel the need to talk like that. I don't know. Um, yeah, I just want to just continue to make art, and if people react to it in a good way, then great. You know. Um, yeah, but yeah, no, this has been the. I've done a lot of interviews. This has been the best interview I've ever had. Like, yeah, like it took me back to so many things that I forgot about. You know, like, yeah, yeah. But that's why I love film coverage. Like, that's why I love what you guys do, because um, it's not about the surface stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's every time I watch film coverage, I don't care who it is or how much you will always gain a gain knowledge or insight. You know what I mean? Because and then you also find like kindred uh, spirits or energy, because you realize that you're not alone. Like the stuff you did that you thought you were crazy for doing, someone else has done it. Someone else has done a little crazier. You thought making a feature in 3 weeks was nuts. Somebody made one in one day, or somebody, you know what I mean? So it's like, okay, maybe I'm not so crazy. Maybe, like there's a solidarity, and there's like a brotherhood there that you didn't know was there, and people who had similar feelings, and people who have made similar sacrifices, and it's a community thing. It's not people sort of lording over you and looking down at you, and like, you can't even talk to these people, and they're just up here, and they're you know drinking their like spring water or whatever. Like it's very much like I feel like it's like a family, communal, tribal thing. With film cars, like it's like a tribe of artists. And that's really cool, man.